was really interesting to be traveling with all these journalists from all these different parts of the world. There were at the most 17 of us, but because of visa problems, not everybody went on every part of the trip. But just traveling with them, getting to know them, and experiencing these different things through their perspectives as well as my own made for some really interesting conversations. We'd be in the bus after having one meeting, and we'd all be really tired, but people wanted to talk about it. And I really saw through their eyes something meant one thing, through my eyes it was something different. So we had very interesting conversations about especially free speech, treatment of minorities, the blasphemy law in Pakistan, and should there be laws against religious speech? Here in America, we don't criminalize it if someone insults your religion, but in Pakistan, that's a capital offense. I had an interesting conversation with one of my fellow journalists who was just amazed, he said, at how open everybody in America was, and especially open about talking about things like religion. And he said to me, wow, after coming here, I have a really new understanding of what you mean when you say freedom of speech. We visited a lot of houses of worship, and in the U.S. we visited a mosque that was a predominantly African-American mosque. We visited Washington National Cathedral. We visited a synagogue that was actually a Reconstructionist synagogue, so on the more liberal end of Judaism. And for many of my colleagues who were part of my journalist group, they had never been in a synagogue before. Some of them had never been in a church before. They'd never seen a woman priest before. So that was sort of interesting for them to have those experiences here in the U.S. In Malaysia, we visited a mosque, and of course I had to wear the head covering and make sure that I was modestly dressed. One of the women in our group wasn't modestly dressed enough, and so they gave her this brightly colored bathrobe. Actually, two of the women in our group had to wear these robes that were brightly colored in long sleeves and everything. And we had the experience of going to the women's section of the mosque, which is also traditional here in the U.S. So that was interesting, but I saw also churches. We went to a Buddhist temple in Malaysia, and we went to a fabulous Hindu temple that was actually in the caves, and we had to walk up 270 some odd steps to get inside this Hindu temple. We went to a couple madrasas, which have the image here in the West of being, very anti-American and fomenting terrorism. The madrasas we visited were very open to us, wanted to tell us about what they do, and were very welcoming. It was really great for me as a religion reporter to get this sense of the diversity of religion, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. In Malaysia, about 60% of the population is Muslim, so it is the majority, but there are healthy numbers of other faith groups that are represented there: Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and others. And there, it was interesting, some of the people from Islamic countries in my group said, wow, I think things seem pretty free for religion in Malaysia. Because these groups, they have their temples, they have their churches, they are not suppressed, they're able to worship freely. But when you look underneath, a lot of the religious minorities there in Malaysia are concerned. They feel like there's a growing pressure of institutionalizing Islamization, so that the country is becoming more and more Islamic, which doesn't necessarily provide them room to operate. So we heard about churches and temples that don't get permits to build when they want to build new buildings. We heard about their court cases about whether minority groups, non-Muslims, can use the word Allah in their publications. And right now, there are publications inside Malaysia that cannot use the word Allah because they're not Muslim. In Pakistan, there's a real problem of violence against the minorities. And we met with several groups, Christians, a group called the Ahmadis, which traditional Muslims think aren't real Muslims because of some of their beliefs. And they've suffered suicide bombings. We went to a church one Sunday that had been damaged in a suicide bombing a few years earlier. Earlier this year, two churches in the city where we were, Lahore, were bombed by suicide bombers. Gunmen have attacked compounds, but not just of Christians and Ahmadis. Shiite Muslims are a minority, and they're considered dissenters, and so they've faced violence as well. And of course, the laws in Pakistan, this blasphemy law, which makes it a capital offense to say anything that's considered insulting to Islam, that has been used heavily against both religious minorities who are non-Muslim and Muslim minorities. The purpose of our trip was to look at U.S. relations with the Muslim world, and I really came away seeing how complicated those relationships are. They're very complicated by 9/11 and the lingering impact of everything that happened surrounding 9/11. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have left a lot of bad feelings in a lot of parts of the world, and I heard about that. I heard about that a lot. Uh, I saw also the role of the media and the images that the media portrays, and then therefore the conclusions that people drew from that. I had some interesting conversations with the reporter from Iran, for example, and he had an image from the media he sees that America spies on Muslims here and discriminates against Muslims here and all of that. And I couldn't tell him, no, that doesn't happen. But what I did tell him is, you don't see the Muslims that live here. Yes, I said, yes, we have problems, but you don't see the Muslims who live here, raise their families, are part of their communities, and who are very happy here. So it's a more nuanced picture than I think people get from other parts of the world when they look at us. But I also saw, for me, I have certain ideas about Pakistan and their ties to terrorism. And while in Pakistan, yes, I heard about violence, but I saw artists who are creating beautiful art. I saw educators that are worried about the next generation. I went to a university and talked to university students that really want to have a better future. So I think seeing it firsthand and also building relationships. Again, one person called it people-to-people diplomacy. And I think the more that happens and the more we understand each other, I really saw the more we can bridge some of those divides.